The first thing I noticed was the sound of a portable generator. It was a low, mechanical hum coming from the east slope, somewhere near the old trellis line where my father had planted the first Cabernet Franc vines 43 years ago. I was standing on the back porch of the farmhouse at 6:42 in the morning, coffee cup warm against my palm, watching a white cargo van bounce down the gravel service road that was not supposed to have any traffic in June. The van stopped between rows 14 and 15. Two men in khaki pants and polo shirts stepped out. One of them opened the rear doors and started unloading white folding chairs. The other man walked into the vines with a measuring wheel, clicking off distances, marking spots with little orange flags. I set my coffee down on the porch railing. I did not call out. I did not walk down there. I took my phone out of my pocket and started taking pictures. The morning light was flat and gray, the kind of light that makes everything look like evidence, which, as it turned out, it was. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who else understands what it feels like to watch a stranger treat your family's land like a public park. My name is Daniel Roussel. I am 58 years old. I own a 22-acre vineyard in the Dry Creek Valley, about 15 minutes outside Healdsburg, in Sonoma County, California. The vineyard is small by commercial standards, but it produces about 18 tons of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot each year, sold under contract to a winery in Geyserville. The land has been in my family since 1979, when my father, a French immigrant who worked construction for 12 years to save the down payment, bought the parcel from an old prune farmer who was retiring. My father built the trellis system by hand. He dug the drainage swales with a rented backhoe. He planted every rootstock himself, with me walking behind him at age 15, tamping soil around the graft unions. He died in 2018. His ashes are scattered under the oldest vine, row 7, post 42. I mention this not for sympathy, but because it matters to the story. It matters because when Karen Whitmore, the president of the Dry Creek Estates Homeowners Association, first called my vineyard a community scenic asset, she had no idea whose name was carved into the base of that post. She had no idea what she was stepping into. And she certainly had no idea that the document in my fireproof safe had been waiting for exactly this kind of fight since 2004. The HOA community where Karen Whitmore reigned was called Dry Creek Estates, a subdivision of 63 homes built in the early 2000s on a former sheep ranch about half a mile east of my property line. The homes were large, Mediterranean style, with tile roofs and drought-tolerant landscaping. The residents were mostly retirees, tech transplants, and second home owners from San Francisco. The HOA was mandatory, with annual dues of $4,200 per household. Karen Whitmore had been president for 6 years. She was a former real estate agent who had never sold a property outside her own social circle, but she carried herself like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She drove a white Lexus SUV. She wore linen blazers in summer. She spoke in complete paragraphs, the kind that sound rehearsed in front of a bathroom mirror. Her signature move was the clipboard. She always had one. It made her look official. It made people assume she had authority. That clipboard became the centerpiece of the entire disaster. The first time I met Karen Whitmore in person was on a Thursday afternoon in late May. I had been in the barn, repairing a drip irrigation line, when I heard tires on the gravel. I walked out, wiping my hands on a rag, and saw the white Lexus parked near the old equipment shed. Karen was standing beside the passenger door, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed up into her silver blonde hair. She was maybe 62, fit, with the kind of posture that comes from Pilates and social confidence. Next to her stood a younger woman I did not recognize, mid-30s, holding a tablet, wearing a headset. The younger woman looked uncomfortable. Karen looked like she was inspecting a property she already owned. "Mr. Roussel?" Karen said. Her voice was bright, polished, the voice of someone who has never been told no by anyone who mattered. "I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Dry Creek Estates HOA. This is Melissa, our community events coordinator. We've been trying to reach you by mail." I nodded slowly. "I don't check the mailbox every day. What's this about?" Karen smiled. It was a practice smile, the kind that does not reach the eyes. "We're launching a new community initiative. The board voted last month to include your vineyard in our scenic lifestyle package. It's a wonderful opportunity. The views from your east slope are absolutely stunning, and we've had multiple residents express interest in using the setting for private events. Weddings, anniversary parties, that sort of thing. It brings prestige to the whole neighborhood. I let the sentence hang in the air for a moment. The rag was still in my hand. I could smell the diesel from the tractor, the dry earth, the faint sweetness of the cover crop between the rows. My vineyard isn't part of your HOA, I said. It never has been. The property line is clearly marked. The survey stakes are still there from the last county assessment. Karen's smile did not waver. Oh, we understand that technically you're outside the formal boundaries. But the visual corridor is what matters. The vineyard is visible from 12 homes in the estates. It's part of the community's aesthetic identity. The board has determined that reasonable access for approved events falls under our community enrichment mandate. We're not asking you to do anything. We'll handle all the logistics. Setup, cleanup, insurance. You won't have to lift a finger. Melissa, the events coordinator, shifted her weight. She glanced at me, then back at Karen. She did not speak. I noticed that her tablet screen was dark. She was not taking notes. She was just standing there, a prop in Karen's performance. You're telling me, I said, keeping my voice level, that your HOA board voted to use my private property for commercial events without my permission. Karen's expression flickered, just for a second, then the smile returned, tighter this time. It's not commercial, it's community. There's a difference. The events committee collects a small venue coordination fee to cover costs. It's not a rental, it's a service to residents. How much is the fee? That's an internal HOA matter, but typically for a full wedding package with the vineyard backdrop, it's around $8,000. That covers setup, liability, and coordination. The residents love it. It makes the neighborhood feel special. $8,000 per wedding, on my land, without my knowledge. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to disbelief. The kind of disbelief that makes you very, very calm. I'd like to see the board vote, I said. The minutes, the insurance certificate, the site plan, and I'd like to know how many events you've already booked. Karen's smile finally dimmed. I don't think that's necessary at this stage. We're just having a preliminary conversation. I wanted to extend the courtesy in person before the summer season begins. We have a wedding scheduled for June 14th. The Vandermeer family, very prominent in the community. The bride's father is an attorney. I'm sure you understand the importance of making a good impression. June 14th. That was 19 days away. I looked past Karen, toward the east slope, where the vines were just starting to set fruit. The morning sun was hitting the hillside, and I could see the faint lines of the old terraces my father had cut into the slope to manage erosion. This land had survived drought, frost, phylloxera, and a wildfire that came within half a mile in 2019. It had survived because my family had treated it like a living thing, not a backdrop for cocktail hour. I understand, I said. Thank you for the courtesy. I'll be in touch. I turned and walked back into the barn. I did not look back. I heard Karen say something to Melissa, too quiet to catch. And then the Lexus doors closed, and the engine started, and the gravel crunched under the tires as she drove away. I stood in the barn doorway, watching the dust settle, and I thought about the fireproof safe in my office. Inside that safe was a document I had not looked at in years, a document my father had signed in 2004, after a long negotiation with the county. A document that, as far as I knew, Karen Whitmore had no idea existed. The document was a conservation agreement, recorded with the Sonoma County Recorder's Office, Book 4821, page 937. It was part of the California Farmland Conservancy Program, a state-funded initiative that pays landowners to keep agricultural land in production and out of development. My father had enrolled the vineyard in 2004, after a developer had offered him $2.3 million for the parcel to build a luxury subdivision. He had refused the offer and signed the conservation agreement instead, accepting a one-time payment of $480,000 from the county in exchange for a permanent agricultural easement. The agreement had three key provisions. First, the land could only be used for agricultural purposes, defined as the cultivation of grapes and the production of wine. Second, any non-agricultural commercial use required written approval from the county agricultural commissioner. Third, and most importantly, any violation of the agreement would trigger a penalty clause requiring the landowner to repay the full $480,000. Adjusted for inflation, plus a fine of up to $50,000 per violation. The agreement ran with the land. It was permanent. It could not be undone by a board vote, a community petition, or a clipboard. I sat down at my desk and opened the safe. The agreement was inside a manila envelope, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges, the county recorder's stamp still crisp and legible. I read through it twice. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Elena Marquez, who had handled my father's estate and knew the property history better than anyone. Elena listened while I explained the situation. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Daniel," she said, "this is not a small problem. If the HOA is running commercial events on your land without your consent, and if those events violate the conservation agreement, you could be held liable for the penalties, even if you didn't authorize the events. The agreement doesn't care who set up the chairs. It cares that the chairs were set up on your parcel." "I understand," I said. "What do you recommend?" "First, document everything. Photos, dates, times, names. Second, send a certified letter to the HOA board, with a copy to the County Agricultural Commissioner, stating that you do not consent to any events on your property and that any unauthorized use constitutes trespass. Third, request a copy of the HOA's insurance certificate and event permits. If they're operating without proper permits, the county will shut them down. And fourth, do not engage with Karen Whitmore directly. Let the paperwork do the talking." I followed Elena's advice. I sent the certified letter the next day. I copied the County Agricultural Commissioner, a man named Robert Shue, who had inspected the vineyard twice a year for the past decade. I also copied the Sonoma County Planning Department and the Sheriff's Office non-emergency liaison. I included photographs of the white van, the folding chairs, the orange flags, and the tire tracks on the service road. I requested a formal investigation into unauthorized commercial use of protected farmland. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days after I sent the letter, I received a phone call from Robert Shue. His voice was clipped, professional, the voice of a man who has spent 30 years dealing with land use violations and has very little patience left. "Mr. Roussel," he said, "I received your letter and the photographs. I also pulled the HOA's event permit applications for the past 18 months. There are 7 applications on file, all for events described as community gatherings, at a location listed as Dry Creek Estates Scenic Overlook. The applications were signed by a Karen Whitmore. The problem is that the parcel number on the applications does not match any HOA-owned property. It matches your parcel, APN 118-24099. I felt my pulse slow. She used my parcel number on county permit applications. She did, and she listed herself as the authorized property representative. "I have no record of any authorization from you. I also have no record of any agricultural commissioner approval for non-agricultural events on your parcel, which is required under the conservation agreement. I'm opening a formal investigation. I'll need to inspect the site. Can you be available tomorrow morning? I'll be here." That night, I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down behind the west ridge. The vines were quiet. The air smelled like warm earth and the faint hint of sulfur from the last spray. I thought about my father. I thought about the day he signed the conservation agreement, how he had called me afterward and said, "Now nobody can turn this place into a golf course." He had laughed, that deep, rumbling laugh that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. He had trusted the agreement to protect the land. He had not anticipated Karen Whitmore. The next morning, Robert Shue arrived at 8:15 in a county truck, wearing a khaki uniform and carrying a thick file folder. He was a short man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and he moved with the deliberate pace of someone who has learned that rushing never helps. We walked the property together. I showed him the tire tracks, the orange flags, the spot between rows 14 and 15 where the folding chairs had been unloaded. He took photographs with a digital camera. He made notes on a clipboard of his own, a real one, with official forms and carbon copies. "The flags are still here," he said, kneeling to examine one. "They're marking a ceremony site. Aisle here, altar here, seating here. This is a full wedding layout. How many guests would you estimate?" "Based on the chair count I saw, maybe 120. That's a significant event. Parking, catering, restrooms, amplified sound. All of that requires county permits, none of which were applied for under the correct parcel number. The HOA applied for a community gathering permit, which has a lower fee and fewer requirements. They deliberately misrepresented the nature and location of the event. We walked back to the barn. Robert Shue opened his file folder and spread several documents across the hood of his truck. There were the HOA's permit applications, all 7 of them, each signed by Karen Whitmore. There were copies of the conservation agreement with the relevant sections highlighted. There was a printout of the county GIS map, showing my parcel boundaries in red, and the HOA common areas in blue. The two did not overlap, not by a single inch. The HOA does not own any land adjacent to your vineyard, Robert Shue said. The nearest HOA common area is a small park about 800 feet east across a drainage channel. There is no easement, no access agreement, no recorded right-of-way. The only legal access to your property is through your private gate on Dry Creek Road. The HOA has no right to enter, no right to use, and no right to represent your parcel on any county document. What happens now? I asked. I'm issuing a notice of violation to the HOA, with a copy to Karen Whitmore personally. The notice will require them to cease all unauthorized events immediately. It will also refer the matter to the County Council for potential penalties under the conservation agreement. The penalties are significant. The base repayment amount, adjusted for inflation, is approximately $560,000, plus $50,000 per violation. With 7 documented events, that's $350,000 in fines. Total exposure is over $900,000. I let that number settle. $900,000 for folding chairs and string lights, for the community scenic lifestyle package, for Karen Whitmore's clipboard. There's one more thing, Robert Shue said. The permit applications include a fee schedule. The HOA charged residents between $6,000 and $9,000 per event. The applications state that the fees cover venue coordination, site preparation, and community enhancement. But there's no record of any of that money being spent on your property. No improvements, no maintenance, no payments to you. The money went into an HOA account controlled by the events committee. I think you should ask to see those financial records. I did not ask Karen Whitmore for the financial records. I asked the HOA treasurer, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had been on the board for 4 years and had a reputation for being meticulous. I had met Patricia once before, at a county water board meeting, and she had struck me as someone who cared about rules. I called her directly and explained what Robert Shue had found. There was a long silence on the line. "Mr. Roussel," Patricia said finally, her voice tight, "I need to look at something. Can I call you back in an hour?" She called back in 37 minutes. Her voice was different now, shaken. "I've been the treasurer for 4 years," she said. "I sign the checks, I reconcile the accounts, but the events committee has a separate account. Karen set it up 3 years ago. She told the board it was for community enrichment initiatives. She said the funds were used for decorations, permits, and liability insurance. I never questioned it, because the events were popular and the residents were happy. But I just pulled the account statements. Mr. Roussel, there's over $240,000 in that account, and the withdrawals don't match any invoices I've ever seen. What do the withdrawals show? Cash withdrawals, transfers to a personal account, payments to a company called Whitmore Event Design, which I'm guessing is Karen's side business. The account has been used as a personal slush fund, and the events were held on your property without your knowledge. This is fraud. This is embezzlement. This is going to destroy the HOA." I thanked Patricia and hung up. I sat in my office for a long time, looking at the conservation agreement on my desk. The paper was cool and smooth under my fingers. My father's signature was at the bottom, a little shaky from the arthritis that had started in his hands that year, but still legible, still binding, still powerful. The next 2 weeks were a slow-motion avalanche. Robert Shue's notice of violation arrived at the HOA office on a Tuesday. Karen Whitmore called an emergency board meeting for Wednesday night. I was not invited, but Patricia Okonkwo kept me informed. She told me that Karen had tried to dismiss the violation as a paperwork error. She had claimed that the vineyard owner had given verbal permission years ago. She had claimed that the conservation agreement was outdated and probably unenforceable. The board did not believe her. The board, for the first time in 6 years, pushed back. On Thursday, I received a phone call from a man named Richard Vandermeer. He was the father of the bride whose wedding was scheduled for June 14th. He was also, as Karen had mentioned, an attorney. His voice was calm, but edged with something sharp. "Mr. Roussel," he said, My daughter is supposed to get married on your property in 10 days. We paid the HOA $8,500 for the venue. We've hired caterers, a florist, a string quartet. We've sent invitations to 130 guests. And now I'm hearing that the HOA had no right to rent your property. Is that true? It's true, I said. I never gave permission. I never received any payment. The HOA used my land without my knowledge. Richard Vandermeer was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. I'm going to need documentation. Everything you have, the conservation agreement, the county violation notice, the permit applications. My daughter is devastated, and I am not going to let Karen Whitmore walk away from this. I sent him the documents. All of them. The certified letter, the photographs, the county investigation file, the financial records Patricia had shared. Richard Vandermeer called me back the next day. I've reviewed everything, he said. Karen Whitmore committed fraud. She misrepresented the venue. She forged your authorization on county permits. She embezzled event fees. I'm filing a complaint with the district attorney's office. I'm also filing a civil suit against the HOA and Karen Whitmore personally for fraud, breach of contract, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My daughter has been crying for 3 days. This was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. I felt a pang of sympathy for the bride. She was an innocent party, caught in the crossfire of Karen's arrogance. I told Richard Vandermeer that I would do whatever I could to help. I also told him that the Vineyard could not host the wedding, even if I wanted to allow it, because the conservation agreement prohibited non-agricultural events without county approval, and the county had already denied approval based on the pending violation. I understand, Richard said. We're relocating the wedding to a winery in Geyserville. They were able to accommodate us on short notice. It's going to cost an extra $12,000, which I intend to recover from Karen Whitmore. But there's one more thing. The rehearsal dinner is still scheduled for June 13th, the night before the wedding. Karen booked it at the HOA clubhouse. She's planning to attend. She thinks she can smooth everything over. I want you to be there. I want the county officer to be there. I want everyone to see exactly what she did. June 13th arrived. The HOA clubhouse was a large Spanish-style building with a terracotta roof and a courtyard fountain. The rehearsal dinner was set up in the main hall, with round tables, white linens, and centerpieces of lavender and olive branches. About 60 people were there, the bride and groom, their families, the wedding party, several HOA board members, and a handful of residents who had heard rumors and wanted to see the drama unfold. Karen Whitmore was there too, standing near the entrance, clipboard in hand, wearing a cream-colored blazer and a fixed smile that looked like it was held in place by sheer willpower. I arrived at 6:30, dressed in a clean shirt and jeans. I was not a guest. I was not there to celebrate. I was there to witness. Robert Shue arrived a few minutes later, wearing his county uniform and carrying his file folder. Richard Vandermeer met us at the door. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of calm, deliberate presence that trial attorneys cultivate. He shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming," he said. "This is not going to be pleasant, but it's necessary." The dinner proceeded for about 40 minutes. People ate, drank wine, made toasts. The bride, a young woman named Emily, looked tired but relieved. She had found a new venue. The wedding would happen. The crisis was, for her, mostly over. But for Karen Whitmore, the crisis was just beginning. At 7:20, Richard Vandermeer stood up and tapped a spoon against his wineglass. The room quieted. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked the new venue for accommodating the wedding. Then his tone shifted. "I also want to address a matter that has caused my family a great deal of distress," he said. "As many of you know, the original wedding venue was supposed to be a vineyard adjacent to this community. We paid $8,500 to the HOA Events Committee for the use of that venue. We were told that the vineyard was part of the community's scenic lifestyle package. We were told that the owner had given full permission. None of that was true. The room went very still. Karen Whitmore, standing near the back, stopped smiling. Her clipboard hung at her side, forgotten. The vineyard owner, Richard continued, is here tonight. His name is Daniel Roussel. He never gave permission for any events on his property. He never received any payment. The HOA president, Karen Whitmore, forged his authorization on county permit applications. She misrepresented the venue to my family and to multiple other families who paid for events on land they had no right to use. And she did all of this on a property that is protected under a state conservation agreement, which means that every event she booked was not only unauthorized but illegal. Karen stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her voice was still polished. Richard, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The board approved the events in good faith. The Vineyard has always been considered part of the community's visual corridor. I was acting in the best interests of the residents. The best interests of the residents, Richard repeated. Let's talk about the residents. Let's talk about the $240,000 in the events committee account. Let's talk about the cash withdrawals. Let's talk about the payments to Whitmore Event Design. Let's talk about the fact that you've been running a private event business on stolen land, using HOA resources, and pocketing the profits. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered on the tile floor. The sound was loud in the silent room. Robert Shue stepped forward. He opened his file folder and removed a document. Ms. Whitmore, I'm Robert Shue, Sonoma County Agricultural Commissioner. I'm here to inform you that the county has completed its investigation into the unauthorized use of APN 118-240019, a parcel protected under the California Farmland Conservancy Program. The investigation found 7 violations of the conservation agreement, each carrying a penalty of $50,000. The total penalty exposure is $350,000, in addition to the potential repayment of the conservation grant, adjusted for inflation, which currently stands at $560,000. The county will be pursuing enforcement action against the HOA and against you personally as the individual who signed the permit applications. A woman at one of the tables gasped. A man stood up, his face red. You're telling me the HOA is on the hook for $900,000 because of her? That's correct, Robert Shue said. The HOA is named in the violation notice because the events were booked under the HOA's name. However, the county is also investigating individual liability for fraud and forgery. Ms. Whitmore signed documents claiming to be the authorized property representative. She was not. That is a criminal matter. The room erupted. People were shouting, standing up, pointing at Karen. Patricia Okonkwo, the treasurer, was crying. Another board member, a man named Gerald, was demanding to see the financial records. The bride, Emily, was holding her fiancé's hand, her face a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Karen Whitmore stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, her cream blazer suddenly looking like a costume, her clipboard on the floor, her empire collapsing around her. I did not say anything. I did not need to. I stood near the back, watching, and I thought about my father. I thought about the day he signed the conservation agreement, how he had said, "Now nobody can turn this place into a golf course." He had been right. The agreement had protected the land. It had also, in a way he could never have predicted, protected the land from a woman with a clipboard and a fake smile, and a sense of entitlement so vast she thought she could rent out a stranger's vineyard like a hotel ballroom. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Karen Whitmore as president. The vote was unanimous. Patricia Okonkwo was elected interim president. The board hired an independent auditor to review the events committee accounts, and the audit confirmed what Patricia had suspected. Karen had embezzled over $180,000 from the HOA, funneling the money through Whitmore Event Design, a company she had registered in her daughter's name. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation. Richard Vandermeer filed his civil suit, naming Karen Whitmore and the HOA as defendants. The HOA's insurance carrier denied coverage for the conservation agreement penalties, citing a policy exclusion for intentional and fraudulent acts. The HOA was left facing a potential $900,000 liability, which would require a special assessment on all 63 households. The residents were furious. Some of them had paid for events on my vineyard. Some of them had attended those events, taking pictures, toasting champagne, never knowing they were trespassing. Now they were facing a financial reckoning because of one woman's greed. As for me, I spent the summer doing what I always did. I tended the vines. I repaired the irrigation lines. I walked the rows in the early morning, checking the fruit set, watching the clusters develop. The county removed the violation notice from my file after confirming that I had not authorized any of the events. The conservation agreement remained in force, as strong as ever. The orange flags were gone, the tire tracks faded. The vineyard was quiet again. One evening in late August, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the West Ridge, when a car pulled up the gravel drive. It was Patricia Okonkwo. She got out, looking tired but determined, and walked up to the porch. "Mr. Roussel," she said, "I wanted to apologize in person. On behalf of the HOA, what Karen did was wrong. What the board allowed to happen was wrong. We should have asked questions. We should have checked the permits. We should have verified the property lines. We failed you, and we failed the community." I nodded. "I appreciate that. How are things going?" "Slowly. The special assessment is going to be painful. A lot of residents are angry. Some are talking about selling. But we're going to survive. We're going to fix this. And Karen is going to face consequences. The DA's office is moving forward with charges. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. She's looking at real prison time." We talked for a few more minutes. Patricia asked if there was anything the HOA could do to make amends. I thought about it. I told her that the best thing the HOA could do was to respect the property line, to understand that the Vineyard was not a community asset. It was a family farm. It was my father's legacy. It was protected land, and it would stay that way. After Patricia left, I walked down to row 7, post 42. The vine was old, the trunk thick and gnarled, the leaves dark green in the fading light. I knelt and touched the base of the post, where my father's name was carved into the wood. The letters were weathered but still legible. Claude Roussel, 1979. "They're gone, Dad," I said quietly. "The chairs, the lights, the clipboard, all of it. The land is still here. The agreement held. You were right." The wind moved through the vines, rustling the leaves, and for a moment it sounded almost like a reply. I stayed there until the stars came out, and then I walked back to the farmhouse, made a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the quiet that had always been there, waiting, underneath all the noise.